Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is John Wakelin and I'm a landscape photographer. I'm on a journey to help others catch the beauty of the world around us. In today's video, I want to do the ultimate guide or beginner's guide to landscape photography. I've been doing landscape photography for about 2.5 years now, and I really wish I had a video like this to help me get started. I've had a lot of learnings along the way, pitfalls, ups and downs, and it's about time I share this with you all. By the end of this video, you should have the confidence to go out with your camera and start capturing some stunning landscape photography. So let's grab your camera and let's get into this. So let's talk cameras. If I'm being completely honest, it doesn't really matter what brand you use. I shoot Nikon, I like how it feels in my hands, and I'm familiar with the menus because I had a DSLR before I upgraded to mirrorless. My friends shoot Sony, they say the same thing, so I think it's all down to personal preference. I don't think one takes better photos over the other. I think a lot more of it comes down to style, technique, and lens quality. I guess my biggest consideration then is if you are looking at camera gear is not necessarily the brand of the camera you want to use, but what sensor suits your budget best. So there are two kind of main types really. You have crop sensor and you have full frame. If you want to do landscapes and wildlife, maybe a crop sensor might be the better option for you. Crop sensor cameras are lighter and cheaper when compared to full frame sensor cameras. So you pay a price for the more full frame cameras in terms of weight and cost. Full frame cameras are essentially better if you want to shoot predominantly landscape images, which are slower moving scenes and are looking for higher levels of image quality. But I think either way, these are both really good for landscapes. So that's my kind of key takeaways. Figure out what you would like to be shooting, and then what, if crop sensor or full frame will be better for the type of scenes that you do. I have a entry level full frame sensor camera because I wanted to spend the money on lenses instead. Brings me on to section number 2, and that is the lenses themselves. For me, lenses are the most important part of your camera setup, and getting the lenses right is much better than getting the camera right in itself, in my opinion. I think the quality of the glass that you stick on the front of your camera is going to have a bigger impact to your overall quality of your images and the images that you produce than doesn't matter if I have the entry level or full frame ones. Yes, you can do megapixel peeping, but it is really down to the quality of the glass you stick on the front of it. So if we talk a little bit about lenses, I guess my recommendation for lenses, I don't think you need to go crazy. For me, I think you need one lens which is your workhorse. So for most people, this will be a 24 to 70mm lens. I think for landscape photography, that is your go-to, and it's most people's go-to, and it's very much my go-to lens as well. It covers all the bases you could possibly want. At 24mm, you can get some incredible scenes, but it also gives you the ability to zoom in and capture some of the details as well. So for me, if you had to buy one lens, or you always had to have one in your bag, that would be it for me. I'm quite lucky, I have a 24 to 120, and that covers every basis for me. That barely leaves my camera, to be honest with you. If I had to choose a second camera lens to use, I would go for a telefocal lens. And this is essentially a camera lens which is 70mm and greater. Typically you would say it would be from 70 to 400 is in the sort of landscape territory for telephoto, and then anything beyond 400 is more your wildlife focal length, essentially. I think that telephoto lenses are really great for compressing images in your scene, like mountains and valleys, and really good for isolating subjects. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned over the last couple of years in landscape photography is you don't always want every detail in the scene. And that is why I think a telephoto lens is a better starting point than a wide angle lens, because a wide angle lens gives you more noise, more things in your scene, and harder to really isolate and get those stunning images. So, as I said, workhorse, which will be your 24 to 70 or around that kind of range. You know, if you're Canon, I think they do a 24 to 105, and Sony does an equivalent one as well. Anywhere along that range is absolutely fine. I would suggest getting a wide angle lens, but I would put that down in your priority lists. I only bought a wide angle lens 2 months ago, so I've done 2.5 years without a wide angle lens, and there's been not that many cases, probably I can count on one hand, where I've been like, oh, maybe a wide angle would be nice. And that's because I guess in those situations you can always just take 2 photos of the same scene and stitch them together as well if you wanted a bit more detail. And it gives you a bit more room, and also it gives you a bit more megapixels as well. So I've kind of gone with that approach over trying to get it all in one photo on one frame. But each their own. I think if you're by the coastline, maybe wide angle is better. You want to get really close to the sea or really close to some of the structures that you have in the water. Whereas probably if you're up in the mountains, wide angle, maybe not so much. So some considerations there on lenses for you. So the next category I wanted to talk about is, I guess, the essential accessories for landscape photography. I think it goes without saying that we're going to be out and about all the time. So I think comfortable boots and or wellies, I think, is an absolute must, along with some warm socks. Those cold mornings, those cold evenings, you're going to need some comfy footwear and to keep your feet warm. And I guess on that as well, another essential one would be thick gloves. I think for me, they're essential for a landscape photographer. You're going to be out and about a lot. You need to be comfortable because, you know, sometimes you'll be out for 2-3 hours. You want to be in something where you're comfortable walking, you've not got blisters, you're not tired, you know, you're often standing up for a lot of that period of time as well. For me, that's essential, and it's one that I don't think many people talk about. They talk more about gear and other stuff. But moving on to gear, there's only a couple of things that I'd recommend. One is a light, flashlight or torch, no matter however you call it, or you can go for the option of a head torch. So something that kind of sticks on top of your head and it kind of frees up your hands a little bit. For me, I'm often out in dark scenes, and I think that you need some sort of that for your safety. You want to see where you're going, you don't want to trip up stuff, and it's great if you ever get lost and you need to find your way. So they are in my essential gear for landscape photography. And the last one I want to talk about is tripods. Now, tripods is, for me, a must, and the must is a sturdy tripod. You can get lots of cheap tripods out there, I think, and you can go crazy on cost as well. I don't think you need to go crazy in cost, but I don't think you want to go cheap as well. So for me, if I had to give 2 recommendations on tripods, it will be go for something that doesn't have a monopod head that sticks up. So when your tripod gets to a certain height when it's exposed, I'll put one on screen now. You don't want one where the top bit extends up too high. The reason for that is because I've witnessed this for myself, and I've also seen other photographers do this. When it's a windy day and you've got your camera up there and you've got that extended to full height, it makes your tripod very top heavy. You get a sudden gust of wind or anything like that, your camera's going over, and we spend a lot of money on gear and we don't want to risk that gear. So I would avoid that at all costs. The other consideration I'll say for tripods is, if you can, try and go carbon fibre. I have a very much love-hate relationship with my tripod. Some days I absolutely love it and I take it out with me all the time, but other times, God, it really does get on my nerves and it feels like it weighs me down a little bit. So I think spend a little bit more to get that carbon fibre, just take some additional weight off of your bag. But what I'm saying there is you can buy something from £100 to £200 range that will be really sturdy and fairly lightweight for you. You don't have to go crazy and go for like the best in the market. If you can and budget's not an issue, it's fine. But a lot of people I know don't tend to worry about that as well. But just get something that you are comfortable putting your expensive camera gear on top of, and you don't have to worry about that. The last one I want to talk about quickly is filters. Now, filters for landscape photographers, some will say these are a must, others say you don't need to bother, you can do a lot of it in camera. For beginners, don't worry about filters. I don't want to say discard them, but don't spend your money on it yet, because I think you're going to go for a lot of experimentations first before you want to invest in that. If I'd say you to buy one filter to practice with, it will be a polarizer. And essentially for the polarizer, you're going to want that to remove a lot of the light and a lot of the glare from your photos. I think it's worthwhile playing around with that and seeing where do you want reflections to be? And I guess this is the artistic choice that you're going to make in your journey as well. If you've got a river, do you want it to be reflective? Do you want to see the subject in the background? Or do you want to cut through that and it's a nice stones or nice pebbles between that you want to get in the frame? And a polarizing filter will allow you to do that. It can bring details out in the sky. So if you were going to buy one lens, my recommendation would be a polarizer, also known as a CPL. And the rest I really wouldn't worry about for now until you're a bit further on in your landscape photography journey. Next one I want to talk about is exposure. So exposing your images correctly is going to be one of your biggest challenges as a landscape photographer. What you want to try and aim for is, I guess, a perfect pitch in your histogram. So as you can see here, I think what I want to recommend to people is choose the good example where you've essentially got a balanced histogram. And I think for all starters, I say aim for a balanced graph in the short term and making sure that you aren't clipping highlights and shadows. And use that as your norm for a little while and get really used to taking that as your photo. And then I think as your confidence starts to grow with histogram, then I would suggest starting to push to the right, which essentially means capturing more of the highlights and the details. So then you can have a little play around and decide what you want. Do I want to have more shadows in this image or do I want to have more highlights in this image? And then you can start to figure out what is your preference in terms of exposure on your image. But definitely start with a balanced and then have a little play around one way or the other. And the key thing here is just coming in, setting your camera up every time and aim for that balanced exposure. I can guarantee you'll be a lot more consistent with your photography. The other important thing that I want to talk about when it comes to exposing your images moves on to focusing. Now, a lot of people don't know where or how they should be focusing their images. Focusing is quite a big topic, and I will probably do a separate video all on focusing, but I'll try and cover this as best as I can in this short video. So getting your focus is key, and I think there's two main things that you need to think about when you're getting the sharp images and focusing on your photos. So I think considering your aperture is the key. So you want to have a small aperture. For landscape photography, we recommend anywhere between sort of f8 and f16 is where you want to be taking your images. So I tend to shoot somewhere between f8 and f11 for most of my photos. Especially at sunrise, I want to go around f9 because I want to get the sun flare coming through. But normally around f11, most of your scene will be in focus without needing to worry too much about where you're going to focus. So the key thing is point one, get your aperture correct. And then the second stage from that is where do you focus on the screen? Now, it doesn't matter if you have a touch for focus or you have a little dial that you move around. As long as you've got single point focus on and you focus a third of the way into the screen. So especially you've got the grids on your camera, that makes stuff a bit easier, but always aim to tap your focus around a third of the way into that scene. And then I can guarantee that your photos will be pretty much on point, especially if you're shooting at f16. And if they're not, then I think you need to start to look at where's the closest subject in front of you. So if you think a subject is, I don't know, 1 or 2 meters in front of where you are, or probably 6 feet, around 6 feet or less, try upping the aperture closing down the aperture to around f16. Take another photo and see if that's getting sharp on your image. So just click around, zoom into about 100% of the back of the screen and just see if you're getting it sharp everywhere. If that still isn't the case, then you probably want to look into something called hyperfocal distance. And that is essentially what's the furthest object to your screen and is your lens able to cover on that based on your focal length. It's quite a detailed subject, definitely worth Googling and doing some more research into. But I think with the first 2 tips, I think you'll be absolutely fine and you don't need to worry too much about that. So on to the fun topics now. So these are apps. And essentially there's going to be lots of apps you're going to want to be using. I think the most important apps are your weather apps. So I tend to look at, I have an Apple device, so I tend to look at Apple Weather. I find that's the most accurate within the next sort of 2 hours or so. But then I tend to use like BBC Weather for, sort of a day or 2 in advance up to sort of a week, kind of is the most accurate. And then I use something like clear skies, which will then give me like cloud cover bits as well. But I use them all the time. So I think getting familiar with weather apps is really good to know when should I be going out. However, I think if you're beginning photography anyway, I think you should just go out regardless of the weather. Like, you just need to be going out. Sometimes you'll have great mornings, other times you won't. But the key thing is you'll get set up. You'll be training your eye as you go. But it's definitely worth looking at those. The other app I'd recommend is Google Maps. Sounds like a bit of a no-brainer really, but pin regular locations of where you want to go to, go online, drop down into locations to see where's a good place for me to stand, you know, and you can do a lot of that research before you get to a location. Especially if you're getting somewhere before sunrise and you've not been there before, it's really good to scope the area out, know roughly where can you park, where do you want to go, and then when you're there you can adjust, but it just kind of gives you that destination to aim for to start off with. The last topic I want to cover in this guide is composition. Now, composition is essentially where the magic happens in your photos. So I think there's certain techniques that you can practice to help improve the composition of your photos, such as stuff like leading lines to help draw the viewer's eye, S-curve, which is quite similar to that, to help bring and lead the viewer's eye to your subject. You want to also think about incorporating your foregrounds and your midgrounds to your backgrounds to create that depth of scene. So it's really great having a tree in the distance on its own, but think about, can I get some of the grass in the detail as well, and how does that separate it in there? Otherwise you tend to get a lot of dead space. So go for your composition and work out what's in my foreground, what's in my midground, and what's my background of every image. And I guarantee you that will help. There are other things you can do, like the rule of thirds or center alignment for minimalist shots and other techniques. That again is down to personal style, but that will help. Try positioning like a church or a boat or something on the third line, leave the rest of negative space. You could have some colour in the sky that way to help balance as well. All things to really think about. And I guess the key thing here is you need to practice this a lot. Composition is something I'm still improving on every time I go out, and I don't think it's ever going to be something you're going to really master. Every situation you're going to face will be different. There'll be a different tree or a different bush, or the tide will be different, or, you know, I think composition is something that you will just continue to improve every time you go out. So I think you just need to be going out and trying these different techniques and training that eye for that. I guess the one point I want to leave you with the end of this guide is don't be frustrated if you walk away and you don't get that image that day. You might go somewhere and go, I don't like any of these photos. You know, it happens. It happens to all of us. We don't talk about this enough in the photography community. Everyone's like, oh, did you get the shot? If you got shots you're happy with. Sometimes you don't. And I think that's okay, but getting over that mindset shift of, okay, it's okay to get there. As a beginner, your purpose is to go out, get familiar with your gear, get familiar with the settings that you're going to need, and find and train your eye for those compositions. And then what happens is when you do go out one morning, you get that spectacular sunrise or that spectacular sunset, you're ready. You know what to do. Your settings are dialed in. You know where you're going to position your camera. You're not flapping. You're not, you know, kind of panicking about what you need to do. You're much more composed and you're enjoying the moment more. And that's the key thing that I want you to take away from this, is that it's not about getting that one shot every time. It's about being prepared for when you do get that chance for that one shot. So that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and also consider subscribing. It will really help me on my channel and my journey to help educate more people and share the knowledge of landscape photography with others. And until hopefully next time, I will see you later. Bye bye.